Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight I'm going to start a little mini-series, as I promised a few days ago, about a video that I was asked to review by one of the commenters. And I undertook this little project because it's necessary to develop the techniques, the expertise, and the strategies in approaching these types of videos. This is a video put out by the Shadow Band Files with Manny S. It has a very short clip, and I'm not going to play it. In fact, I encourage everybody to stop this video right now and go to this, and the link is in the description, and play it a couple times, and then come back here. So go ahead, pause your video right now, and go listen. Okay, presuming of course that you've already listened to this, we'll now get into the history of this. Basically, Manny has put out a video here, and I have no qualms with Manny whatsoever. Nothing about what he does is of too much interest to me. But he did put out this video, and it does have a unique and interesting sound in it. And so basically this video is located out there on the east side of the venue, is north towards the church. I don't actually know exactly where, and I don't exactly know where the original source for this video is. And if any of you do, I'd appreciate providing me with the location and the links in the comments. But anyway, the video starts off with a volley, and at the very end of the volley you hear a distinct sound that sounds something like a supersonic crack. And what's unique about this auditory experience is that for the most of the volley there are no quote-unquote supersonic crack-like sounds. It's all muzzle type sounds. So naturally some people take that as evidence of a sniper or a second gun or whatnot. For those longtime viewers of this channel, you know that just based upon one sound for 1 second, I rarely come up with any conclusions about what the sound is. So I undertook this because I knew it would be quite the adventure, and it has turned out to be quite the adventure. And I've rediscovered a few things I already knew along the way, and I was quite surprised at some of the work I'd done already. Now, this series is going to be a few videos long, and it's already inspired 4 or 5 videos, which hopefully some of you have watched already. In particular, the one last night talking about the cone of silence, and then I think the one prior to that talking about how to match, or one of my recent ones, how to match patterns up to volleys to determine what volley you have. So anyway, the thing that I normally start with is I sit down and I watch the video, and I probably will watch it first without sound just to see where I'm at, and then I'll listen to it, and I'll listen to it a couple times, try to figure out what they're talking about, and so that I can get an idea of where I need to look in the audio or the video to make sense of what's going on. So let me bring up I took notes while I was doing this, so let me see. Prior to this week, I don't recall having looked at this video. I'm sure somewhere along the line I saw it once, but I've never performed any real analysis on it. So this week was the first time that I really did anything of any serious nature with it. And the whole purpose of this little adventure is to determine the nature and quality of that sound that you hear near the end of the volley. Is it a sniper? Is it a sound produced by something other than gunshots? Or is it a sound produced by the volley itself? Now, since we hear a volley going on, my preference, of course, is to say that, well, that was probably produced by some bullet that was closer than needed to be, and that is indeed a supersonic crack, because that's what it sounds like to me just by listening. And that's the end of the story. But You know, some people aren't quite satisfied with that explanation, and neither would I be, because I have to know, I have to understand, I have to explain what's going on. And the first thing that you have to explain is, why aren't there more supersonic cracks? If crack is produced by the gunshots of that volley, why aren't there more? It's a perfectly valid question. And I know from my past experience that analyzing these single sounds it's going to be an adventure, shall we say. And most of the time they end up being what I thought they were, or nothing at all. Now, there are some sounds throughout Vegas that I don't understand, and there are some single sounds that sound like gunshot sounds that I have no clue where they're from or why they exist, or even if they really are gunshot sounds. But the thing about this is, to make a lot of people happy and to do a quality job, you have to prove not only that it is something, but you also have to prove what it's not. So unlike going to a criminal trial where it's the other person's job to prove that you're guilty, that doesn't seem to be the case in most of the Vegas investigatory videos. So I'm going to take all approaches to the best of my ability. Alright. And of course, these types of investigations, since you're proving both what it is and what it isn't, tend to take quite a bit of time. And as this one has done, I've spent quite a bit of time on it this week. Okay. And, you know, like everyone else, part of the intrigue in doing this is in the ability to solve a mystery and be involved with the mystery and, you know, challenge yourself to look at things perhaps in a different way, or to challenge yourself to better understand what you believe you know. So rarely is any investigation that I do fruitless in some regards. Now, right up front, and I've stated this in other videos, not every sound can be reverse engineered, because sound is a pressure, and the pressure that reaches the recording device or even reaches your ears is going to be the sum total of all the sounds up until that point, coalescing into one experience. And when those things all coalesce together, a lot of information is lost that can't be reverse engineered. So it's not always the case that we can determine what a sound is, or more importantly, what the cause of a sound is. And of course, as always, this is one man's opinion, mine. But I think that this channel provides a unique, dedicated, and realistic experience when it comes to gunshot analysis. And I want to state right up front that even I don't play people's videos much because I tend to shy away from the whole copyright issue. But I'm not here to make any money off people's videos, and if and when I do use portions of people's videos, it's strictly, you know, a fair use type situation. It's for explanation, commentary, or research. Alright. And as I said before, I've got no quarrel or bias towards the shadow band files with Manny S. And I encourage, as always, everyone to ask questions and replicate the experience that you're going to have with this little mini-series on your own. Alright, for now we're going to skip the sense of the argument. Okay, so I start out by obtaining the source, downloading it, so that I can load it up into my tools. And if you just go to the link you already probably have, you know that this is a video from the shadow band files with Manny S, and it's about 20 seconds long. And when you watch it, I've noted several different things. First off, it looks to me like it's near the church up there, but I'm not really sure. The description says in the parking lot across from Mandalay Bay. Well, there's a couple parking lots out there, but I can see that we have a clear line of sight from where that camera is to the 32nd floor. So naturally I would assume that because there's a clear line of sight, that the muzzle blasts are going to be fairly clean and fairly prominent. And that's in fact what we hear on the tape. We also notice that there's not too much movement in the camera position, so there's not going to be too much distortion and timing produced by the person, running back and forth or two different places. And the most I would say that they moved is about 3 feet. We do notice that there's lots of hard surfaces. Looks like trees and walls and pavement and concrete and just a bunch of things. So I would expect in this video there to be some complications arising out of echoes and reverberation, and maybe even some on the lower frequency end caused by diffraction of the lower frequency stuff over the walls or around the corners of the trees and buildings. And then I go through the video and I note what's happening at certain places, because the camera rotating or looking down can alter the audio pretty substantially. And if I see changes in the audio, then I come back to my little list here and notice that at starting out, the video starts looking first at the Tropicana, and then it has to rotate back over to the left to come into the position it ultimately comes into about 5 seconds, and from there it stays pretty stable until the end, when it goes back to kind of looking at the Tropicana. Okay, so we've watched the video a little bit, we've listened to it a little bit, we can hear that there's a volley. Hopefully you can hear the little crack that occurs towards the end of the volley. And then what I'll do is I'll give it another thorough listen and make some comments. I think that this video starts during a volley. That is, there's probably some portion of a volley that was already going when they started recording, and I noticed that the quality of the audio is pretty good. There are echoes, and there are people speaking in the background, but not very loud, so we're not going to get a lot of the audio of the gunshots overridden or clouded by people talking. Maybe just a little bit. That the muzzle sounds are clear, and that near the end of the volley there is one prominent crack. So indeed I can confirm that I hear what other people are talking about, namely that crack. And then about the 10-second mark, there's some delayed echo that occurs, as I would expect because of the surrounding environments. And there's also some other echoes that occur at other places in the audio. So for that 20-second little thing, we've got quite a little bit of information. So the next thing I would do is I would open up Sonic Visualizer and look at the waveform. And let's do that. Alright. Well, here we have both channels. It's a stereo recording. And while most of my work is done on one channel, I often look at two channels to see what's going on with the recorder itself or with other things. And the first thing that just jumps out at me is that the signal is nice and clean, and that there's a lot of signal. There's a good signal to noise ratio because these peaks are much higher than the constant stuff in the background. But the other thing that jumps out at me is that this is flat, and that's a very unusual circumstance. And so channel 1 is mostly flat during the entire length of the volley, whereas channel 2 is varying. Okay, so that's something that has to be looked at, because that's not typical or normal of recordings in general. And normally that would indicate that the signal was so loud that it was clipped, and we'll get into that in a minute. Now I'm going to be jumping back and forth to my notes to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Okay, so the next thing I would do is zoom in to check on the clipping. So let's zoom in. Clipping occurs when there's too much signal to be recorded in the dynamic range of the medium. And what will typically happen during clipping is that the top end or bottom parts of it will become flat as it reaches the maximum or minimum volume or intensity that can be recorded. So if I put this over into this flat region at the top and I zoom in until I can see the individual signals, then sure enough, we've immediately confirmed that, and I'll stretch it out here, that the top and bottom of that part are flat. And they're flat for quite a bit of distance. So already we know that while the signal looks clean and sounds clean, it is in fact pretty distorted. That is, there's a lot of information that's been lost here in this clipping. So we're going to have to take that into account when we make any real judgment calls on this sound. Now you'll notice that in this particular waveform that the second channel appears to be delayed, but it could be just due to the clipping on the top where we can't even find the peak because of in the first channel, and that the waveforms aren't identical from channel to channel. So then you kind of just mosey along here and look at the signal and notice that in some cases it's actually a little bit out of phase. That is, when this one starts going down right here on the second channel, the top one kind of starts going up. So those portions, and I'll put it right in the middle, you see as that one's peaking, that one's going down. So those signals that actually partially cancel out. And I did a video on that when we're talking about when you overlay audio tracks, how they can cancel out because of the alignment of the signals. And that's another form of distortion. When you play these together, you're going to lose some information, and that's why I do analysis on each channel separately. Alright, so let's get over here to where we think the next signal is and take a look at it more carefully. It's clipped on the top, partially clipped on the bottom, and again we see the same sort of discrepancy in the signals, and we'll do that for one more. This time move to the right a little bit, see what this one is. And here we see the same thing all over again. Okay, so that's common throughout. And if we shrink it back down here so we can see the whole volley, and then where was that big sound that we heard towards the end? Well, after having looked at dozens of these, I can immediately draw your attention to it. It's right there. So if we zoom in on that region, we'll see that there appears to be more signals there. That is, over here we've got this nice little gap that's about 1.5 inches long, another one 1.5 inches. Whoops, then we got one that comes too early, and then we got another one which would be 1.5 inches normal if it didn't have this thing in the middle. So we have in fact identified something in there that's a little different. Okay, and it's clipped, and it's clipped both top and bottom several places. So that indicates that this signal was a little bit larger in amplitude for a longer period of time. So it was a louder sound. Let me bop back over to my notes here and see. Okay. So if we shrink this all the way back down, I want you to observe something here. You'll see that after the volley stopped, that the signal slowly started rising back up to a level, both on the bottom and on the right. And that's what we call automatic gain control circuitry kicking in. That while the signal was loud, it had the gain turned way down so that it could try to get the signal on and couldn't. So whatever device this was recorded on, it didn't do a very good job of getting all of the signal recorded, and I don't know why. But even after the loud sounds were gone away and we go back to listening to just the background noise, the camera tries to adjust the gain up so we can get more of the softer signals being recorded, and I've marked those with the green in the area. You'll also notice that we have these alternate little spikes here that kind of look like these things over there, only not as prominent, and they're in both channels. Just the bottom one is a little bit more prominent on the low side than the top one, And those are probably echoes of some type. Alright, let me go look at my notes, see what it said next. So abrupt change of volume near 17 seconds. 17 seconds, okay. Oh yeah. Right here we see that the amplitude of the signal just jumps up almost instantaneously. So I'd open that up, and it's not, upon further review, it actually isn't instantaneous, it sort of ramps up. So I'd dial this back here and then play it and see what that is. Just somebody talking more loudly, so no big deal. Nothing to be suspicious about. Alright. Near 2.1 and 2.6 looks like an overlap of something. 2.1 and 2.6. Alright. 2.1, 2.6. Oh yeah, if you look kind of close here, you'll see that there's some extra, whoops, there's some extra noises going on in there. You see those little bitty up and down spikes that don't really exist over here. So, and those little things continue on right in the middle there. So it looks like there's an overlap of something. Don't know what yet, but it's just something to be aware of that, you know, we may need looking into. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the let's pick one of these. In particular, we're going to pick the one that we're interested in and go way down deep and look at the width and duration of these signals, because let's see if we can't change this to a more interesting. That's a little bit easier on the eyes. Now, at this scale, you can see a big difference between the signal on over here and that one, namely that the well, actually on the top it's even easier. These signals tend to be wider than these signals, and that's a pretty good indication that we're dealing with a crack here, a supersonic crack, and over here is a muzzle, because on average the muzzle blasts tend to be about 2 to 3 times wider than the cracks. So that's just confirmation that indeed what we think is probably a supersonic crack there is, and that should help us along our investigatory course. We don't have to, you know, determine whether or not it was some modified or distorted muzzle blast, because it has more and more of the characteristics of a supersonic crack. Okay, and I think we're about done now with that portion of it. Alright, so the next thing I do is I pull up a power spectrogram to try to answer the questions of where is the energy of the audio associated. So let's go over and do that. Now, in this case, I guess we can just overlay on top of it. We're going to add a layer. We're going to add a spectrogram layer, and we're going to do it just for channel 1, because otherwise, you know, things get a little messy. Alright, so here we have a pseudo power spectrogram, and here we're going to do that by doing dB squared which basically is the squared of the intensity of the signal. And I'm going to go to 512 bin size for my windows, or window size, because that's where I usually work. I'm going to change a few of these other parameters, adjust the gain to where I normally like it, and then I'm going to start looking at this thing. Well, the first thing that stands out is that there's something right in the middle of it that's continuous that isn't normal. Now, I didn't particularly hear that sound, so I don't know what it is, but it seems to get louder the further along this video goes. And right now we have most of the video in there at once, but you can clearly see on the lower left hand side where the that's a little big. So what happens when I move the mouse wheel around. Anyway, so right here you can see that that's where the volley ends, and it's already started over there. So that confirms that the volley was already running. And we have these things, and I'm going to call them railroad tracks. And then we got bunches of lines going up and down everywhere. But I divide the this whole mess into quadrants, so I can talk about them more easily. And this is about what I do. So the lower left hand quadrant contains most of the things we want to know about the audio for the volley, and in the lower right hand quadrant, after the volley is stopped, we see mostly things associated with the voices. In the middle we have the railroad tracks, where is yet unknown, and then up here are the higher frequency portions of the audio for the lower regions. So let's eliminate those marks. Alright, and go back over to my notes. And 50%. And it says now make 4 quadrants and position it where the gain changes, which I did. As you can see, the gain changed right in here somewhere. Alright. Then we can shift it left just to look at that. Somewhere in there. Doesn't really matter much. And now in my notes next, I'll say we've got it divided into 4 quadrants, separated by the railroad tracks. Yep. And that lower left-hand sign is organized with regular repeating patterns that are percussive in nature. That is, these are up and down things here. And if we open it up a little bit, they'll be more prominent. You can start to see the up and down lines. Those are called percussive sounds. Whereas over here, these are kind of harmonic because they go left and right. Alright. What else do we want to observe there? Talked about the railroad. Talked about chaotic harmonic vocal. Yeah, the stuff on the right over here, which are the vocal sounds, while you'll see a couple of percussive sounds, most of them are kind of fuzzy, and they do things a little different. And if we favored harmonics as opposed to percussive, you can start to see that these things that slide quite a distance along there are interesting. And then we have this one thing in here which just boggles my mind. It starts to look right in here, and I have to adjust this to get just the right look at it. I think 1000 window size was good. And you can see that there's harmonic stuff in there, but then it overlaps on top of something. It almost looks like it turned into a chaotic region of sound, where there's a transition from order to non-order. But it could just be overlapping sounds, and I do not know what all these things are here. I do not know what the railroad tracks are. So you can see this, there's a lot of mystery involved with looking at these things. But on this power curve, you can distinctly see the peak for the one sound that we want, and that's right here. Now the volley ends here, and there's something else over here, but you'll notice that if we expand it out, it's considerably wider and fuzzier. than this narrowly defined region. So, and that's pretty typical, this, strong peak here of percussive sounds. These other sounds, they are not quite as intense, and they're the muzzle blasts. All right. What else do we want to talk about on this power scale? Okay, so that would be the power curve. So next what I would do is I would switch over to a log frequency plot, which is, well, let's just do it and I'll show you what it does. Remember, I was working on power right now. So then I change this over to a linear scale on a different color, and every color set has it applies different gain to different frequencies, so they emphasize some and de-emphasize others. And there's always the preferred size for everything, and then I'm going to change it to a log frequency. So here you can see we're going to get a lot more detail, particularly at the lower frequencies. So we start to be able to clearly distinguish the fine structure of the gunshots. So here, these bright red things, those are the muzzle blasts. And the peak thing right up here, you'll see that's the supersonic crack. And that looks pretty typical of supersonic cracks at a distance. And these look pretty typical of muzzle blasts at a distance. And we could actually measure their frequency and see that the well, first off, we have to kind of get this thing out of the way. We see that the muzzle blast, in this case, have most of their energy below 640 hertz, and that the one supersonic crack that we know of has most of its energy above 640 hertz. Now that varies depending upon the distance, because high frequencies get absorbed by the air quicker than lower frequencies, so the further in distance you are away from the muzzle blast and or the trajectory of the bullet where the shock wave was created, the frequencies tend to lower until, when you're out a couple thousand feet, they're almost the same and they're hard to distinguish. But in this case, we got pretty good indications that we could, if there were other supersonic cracks in here that were audible, separate them out quickly. So we put that line there and we shrink down everything and we start looking for big pulses of sound. And it looks like we have some over here on the left somewhere. And so we would jump over there. This little, let me highlight it. This little region there looks to be kind of like a supersonic crack. Question is it? Okay, so when we expand it out, it does not look like it unless the supersonic crack occurred at the precise same time as the muzzle blast. So once again, I would lay my frequency down right into the middle of those big blobs, and then I would move this whole thing right. And then you would see that, well, no, it's just the muzzle blast and it's kind of separating apart a little bit. Let's go all the way to the end where we get that one crack. There we go. And so you'll see that the crack there has a lot in common with the muzzle blast, but it's not as intense, and it goes up higher. So if we really wanted to make a test here, we'd put it right there, which on the right side over there is just above the normal highest frequency for a muzzle. And then we go back and forth looking for any exceptions. Okay, now we start to see a little bit of incursion on the top part. So this is what we're trying to do here, separate them out by frequency. And there we see some sounds that occur at the same time as the muzzle blast that might be associated with other supersonic cracks, but you can't say for sure because they're at the same time, which kind of leads me to believe that they're not the supersonic cracks. Let's just pick one. Let's pick one right there and expand it out a lot and drop drop it down into a really small bin size and see what it is. And no, it just looks like, yeah, it looks like a replication of the first, or an echo of the first wave is all it is. So it's not a supersonic crack. It looks to be just a duplicate of the first wave, which was the muzzle. Alright, so kind of mystery solved, I guess you could say. So then we put all these back up to the right window size and get everything back to where I wanted, and we were looking right about there, and it continued going left just to make sure. Yeah, okay. Very good. So really, the only prominent supersonic crack then at this point is that one that everybody hears. So that's all fine and good and dandy. And the other muzzle blacks, they look all normal and regular and whatnot. So let's go back over to my notes and see what I said. Okay. So the next thing I would probably do is try various gain and color schemes to see if I can bring out more of the details of the signal. So what I would do is go up here and try what is called fruit salad. And fruit salad is just a vivid color scheme, to say the least. And you can see that immediately we, get much higher contrast than before, and we can start to see more detail on the things in general. It looks a lot fuzzier, of course, but up here you start to see some interesting stuff happening. And in fact, down here you see interesting stuff happening. And then it would be, it's a lot harder, of course, to separate them out that way, but you get a finer look at what's happening. So here's an event in there of some kind that we probably need to pay attention to. And as we up the gain, we do in fact see things start to happen that remind you of supersonic cracks. In particular, here's one right there. Let me mark it so you can all see it. This is a supersonic crack that's recorded but not audible. And so, that wasn't the only supersonic crack. It's just the only one that was very audible. Here's another. I'll just bring it right over into the circle there. See, there it is. Okay. And I would keep looking along there just to see, what else I can see. So what I'm looking for is artifacts that fall between the muzzle blasts. And there might be some up there. Let me get rid of that circle. So right through there, this one might be, that one might be. But they're so low as to be essentially useless for any analysis per se. Now that is until I bring up the gain and we can see more detail. So if we continue to bring up the gain, then we see that those in fact are not supersonic cracks. That's part of the railroad track phenomena. So now we got to go back through and see if there really was any supersonic crack. Probably right there still. Probably another one right there, although that could be an echo. Definitely was one right there that got fuzzed out. One right there for sure. Oh, definitely one right there. So that's a 10-4 on that being a supersonic crack. It was not audible, or if it's just way down on the noise. But it is there. There was another one. So we do have other supersonic cracks in here. So it's just that this one at the end is so loud that it just sticks out on the other. So you can see by applying different gains here, you can start to look at different details. And we could take this gain all the way up to see what would happen in between. And we start to pick up some more. But all those are going to be inaudible. Yeah, I'm fighting a cough here, as you can tell by my voice. I'm going to Suck on a cough drop. Okay. So we do have fine structure. We do have other supersonic cracks, but none of them are going to be useful for an audio analysis purposes. So that one might be. No, that's part of that muzzle, isn't it? Oh well. Alright, wasted too much time on that. Let's go move on to the next little note. Alright. Then there's another one another color scheme that I'm really fond of. Alright, it's called Banded. And Banded is kind of like a high contrast gain. And so I'd lower this back down to something reasonable, the gain that is. Until I can see these things. And then I would apply the Banded one. Poof. And now, you know, this is kind of like a high contrast, so you see things that are there, but not in great detail in terms of the fineness. And again, we'd play this little, you know, up and down to see if we can see stuff developing or not developing. Take it all the way down. Scrunch it down here. Okay. And then roll up the gain. And particularly watch the upper and lower tops to see what pops up. So here's the one crack. Here's a couple more over there. And right there, that one's not a crack at all. That's something else. So there's that crack, one there, one there, one there, and one there. Which is pretty much what we were seeing. Okay. So no other new major developments there. Alright. So now that we're done playing around with all this stuff, well, let's leave them on high gain here and just pop back over to the green one. It looks completely different, doesn't it? It sure does. Alright. And the sunset is what I normally use for most of my audio analysis. So back to the notes. Oh yeah, there is something I needed to cover here. And this is kind of the esoteric part of the analysis. We pop back over to Banded, and we shrink this down until we see the entire video. I'm going to start adjusting the gain upward to obscene levels. Okay. Well, we see that there is actually a top end up here. So there's something flat there, there's something flat there, and there's probably something flat in there. And let's keep adjusting it until we can mic out what all those are. In fact, let's up the gain by a huge amount. Nope. And then that stuff which was previously black now has something to it. Look, that we start to get fine structure in this region to the right. And that's theoretically where there's no sound. Okay, so now we're starting to see what's known as artifacts produced by probably the compression. You see, this is flat on the bottom, it's flat on the top, and as we increase the gain, there'll be another region right above it. And if let's go down to the sunset one, which gives us a little bit better. So here we can see there's actually three. The top one, which is bluish, the one, come on, below it, which is reddish, and then the yellow one, and then the bright yellow one. And basically, these are things that are introduced by the software, or the software, whether it's the editing tool, or whether it's the uploading process, or the compression and decompression. These are things which you can look for to see if there's multiple instances of compression and or editing going on. And you'll see that since this region here is substantially different than that, there may be something of interest to look at. And that's all I'm going to say on that for the moment. But you can oftentimes find those, like see right here, there happens to be a big band right there in the software itself when the signal is low that could affect, you know, when you're looking at some of these other things under low gain conditions. I don't see any here, but there could be. Yeah, okay, no. Alright, on to the next note. Okay. Oh, that was on power. I should have been doing all of that on power. Oh well. So let me go back and enhance that a little bit. Let's go back to power. And go to banded. And see if we can see something else. You see the top end better. Yeah, see the railroad track better. You see when the gain change occurred better. I should be able to see these other things popping up better. Yeah, I see it popping up there on the right. So power is much better for looking at those things than not. And here you can see this is flat, that's flat. Railroad tracks are flat. The top end there is flat all the way across, and then those little bitty signals tend to have a top end to them also. And as we keep up in the gain, so we see more regions pop up on the right. So that is better rather than using the log frequency. Okay. Yeah, much better. We just pop back to green. You don't see it as much. Pop over to sunset. Yeah, see some of it, but not all of it. So the power spectrogram is much better at finding those types of regions than the frequency is, log frequency. All right. Now, so what is the takeaway from a log frequency plot? You can adjust all these parameters to look at just about anything you want, and depending upon the scale and the gain, you know, you can adjust it to where there's very little noise between the rounds, but you lose some of the detail of the things, or you can up the gain to get good amplification, but everything becomes fuzzy because of the noise in between. Now those are the trade-offs in there. If I wanted to know more about the frequency, I would go up the size of the window, and you would see that there's less timing information but more detailed on the frequency. If I up it to 4K, for example, then there's very little exactness in the time at which these events occurred, but great precision in the frequency. And if I went the other way around down to 128, I'd have great precision in when they occurred, but not much precision in their frequency because it's up and down all over the place. So those are the trade-offs with a Fourier transform. I stick to around 512 for most of my work. Okay, back over to my notes. We will soon get into talking about what this whole situation is. All right. We did a lot of that hour. Okay. So we're just about at the end of tonight's session. There's only one other thing that I want to do before I wrap up the session tonight. this session, part 1 of what is probably a 5-part series. I did all those things. Yeah. Okay. So get this back down into some nonsensical, and look at that little thing again. So here we are. We're able to examine this signal with a waveform, with a power spectrogram, with a log frequency spectrogram. We can adjust the gain, the colors, all sorts of things, the windowing size, to highlight or de-emphasize various aspects of the signal, things you can't do with the ear. And we can quickly isolate the one sound that we have of interest, and we have confirmed that it does meet the criteria for a supersonic crack. But the immediate question becomes, what generated that supersonic crack? Because, as I've said many times, if you have a supersonic crack, you typically have a muzzle blast associated with it. But here we just see the regular cadence of the normal muzzles with no supersonic cracks associated with them. Then all of a sudden just this one strong one pops up. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. If this is an independent sound without a muzzle, that's lower probability than just all muzzles and one crack that's snuck in. So next, we're going to determine what volley this is. And for me, that's really quite easy because I have a huge database of volley patterns set up. So what I'll do is I'll bring in the muzzle pattern from a different video, and since we know this camera didn't move much, then the timings for the muzzle blast should agree with just about any other volley that's static. So what I'll do is I'll add a pane, move that thing over to here, and I'm going to make it so I can move it left and right. Alright, and then I'll bring in some annotation, and I'll bring in one that contains multiple volleys, including the one I think this one is. Okay, and then I'll save my work, because this kind of stuff tends to crash the software. Alright, so here's the instance for the video that I brought in, and I'll just keep shifting them right until okay, here we're getting into the volley 5. It's not volley 5. It's not volley 6. Could be volley 7 if it was cut off. Okay. It's not volley 8. Definitely not volley 9. How about 10? You see, I'm just doing a straight pattern match. No, it doesn't look like that one, because 10 is pretty variable. Okay, that's all we have there. Okay, so of those, 7 look like the best match. So let's bring 7 over. That's 8. Here's 7. Okay, so what we're going to do is now we're going to line it up in great detail. And so we pick, oh, I don't have my little thing up. Oh well, my little measuring tool, so I'll use this. So right there on the last muzzle blast, I'll bring over the last muzzle blast here. Okay, and they look to line up pretty good. If I increase the intensity up there so that the lines come down to the bottom, I'll be able to line them up easier. So we see match, 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 match. Not quite match. Need to nudge it a little bit. Okay. So this one's looking to be a pretty good match. So we've quickly identified this as being a portion of volley 7. So now we need to identify, oops, wait a minute, was that like that or that? Oh, that's a better match right there. Right there. This one doesn't match up exactly, so there may be a little bit of movement in the camera. Alright, so volley 7 it is. So now we can talk about, we'll see, where we're at in this whole business. So I was trying to make sure I get the last one. You see, some kind of it's a little difficult here. This one could actually be an echo of that. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Okay, so this was an echo of that. So that's actually the last shot. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So between the 6th and 7th from the end is where the crack occurs. And I think that volley 7 is 95. So that would be 95, 94, 93, 92, 91, 90. So between the 89th and 90 shots, there is a supersonic crack. Now, at this point in time, we've identified the volley, we've identified which shot it is, we've identified that it's a supersonic crack. What we now have to do is go out and determine what's the source and cause. Still, at this point, I would favor that this is an anomaly caused by, not an anomaly, a supersonic crack caused by one of these bullets, as indicated from a muzzle blast. And what we really have to do is explain more why there aren't supersonic cracks all along here. And so that's the next great adventure. But along the way, we also have to start by asking if this is a sound that is local just to this video, or if it's global in scope. Because if it's a supersonic crack, it should be recorded in places that are kind of distant from the path of the bullet. Which, if you've listened to many of my videos, you know that when there's a large, we measure things in terms of downrange distance and cross-range distance, and when there's a large cross-range distance, then the lag tends to be small, but you tend to get better recordings of both the muzzle and the supersonic crack, because the supersonic crack is generated closer, that's recorded at those positions, is recorded closer to the muzzle, and therefore does not suffer from, like in the last video I did, from the cone of silence phenomena. That is, if bullets hit, they hit long after the supersonic crack is generated if you deal with something. Now let's just pull up one to make that very, very clear. So for example, I think I've probably gone way over my 30 minutes already, but let's just do it anyway. I know for a fact that the Oasis Hotel is far removed from any bullets, so therefore it has a small lag and will record everything reliably. And I believe it records volley 7 also. Yeah, it should record volley 7. And yeah, here we are. So in this case, if I change everything back to our, and isn't it nice, we got it nice and numbered already. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So between the 6th and the 7th, or if I bring the text back up, it'll tell me the precise numbers. There we go. Between 89 and 90, we see a strong supersonic crack. It's not the same lag as the other one, but this is since the Oasis Hotel, Oasis Apartments is far removed from the bullet paths. its supersonic crack that's recorded here is produced very near the hang on for a moment, I need to go take care of something. I'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm back. We were talking about the fact that Oasis Apartments records things fairly reliably, and so we can see that we stretch this out, and actually I think that's why I had it on black and white. It was easiest to see up there on black and white, or white on black, however you look at it. Yeah, here we see that these darker regions on the bottom are the muzzles, and these lighter regions up there are the supersonic cracks, but it records them for every single shot. And so this means that this phenomena of the louder supersonic crack, since it is recorded on the Oasis Apartments video, is global in nature. So, and since well, I'll just go ahead and make the statement right now. Since it is global in nature and it is recorded, and this crack is recorded as being generated near the Mandalay Bay, then the source of that crack is the Mandalay Bay. Not a sniper, not a lone stray gunshot, not another gun. It's from the Mandalay Bay. And you could say, well, couldn't there have been two guns at the Mandalay Bay? I suppose there could have, but not one that would produce this regular little pattern like that of having one supersonic crack for every muzzle in a timely cadence. So that gives you pretty much the answer to the question, but there's still a lot behind this story. What's causing that louder sound? What's the bullet trajectory? Does the cone of silence come in, or do we have some new stranger phenomena? But basically the answer is that it's not a sniper. And we're going to have some more videos, and we're going to have some more discoveries, and there may still be a mystery by the time I'm done with this entire series. So anyway, let's wrap it up for tonight, because we've gone over a lot of stuff, and we'll grab you on the next one.